You are now watching The Meech.
It was a year without a bad Nintendo game, no unfinished games this year, and no trash. It was a year without a Battle League, the best we've ever seen. I gotta be real with you guys, this year has been the best year Nintendo has ever had. Pikmin 4, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and so many other games have made this year an absolute buffet to be a Nintendo fan. And you know what? Even F-Zero 99 ended up pretty dang cool. Even Everybody 1-2 Switch had its moments. But honestly, although I despise bad games, it's fun to tear them apart and rip them to shreds like no gaming journalist would ever do. So needless to say, I was quite hungry for a bad game to play. I said I wanted a bad game, not botulism in a cartridge. Ugh, Pokemon makes me sick. But the thing is, outside of Pokemon, everything Nintendo-wise has been great, but I still yearned for that one fiasco, a disaster of a game, perfect for a Trash or Treasure episode. We may have not gotten that fabled unfinished Mario baseball game, but Mario's rival, on the other hand, has supplied us with the goods. It's no secret Sonic the Hedgehog games are extremely hit or miss. For every Sonic Generations, you have a Sonic Forces, and for every Sonic Mania, you have a follow-up being Sonic Superstars. When Sonic Superstars was announced, fans were overjoyed. My good pal T&D specifically was super hyped. It appeared to be a new 2D Sonic game in the classic style, but with new worlds to explore, new abilities, and the return of the beloved rival, Fang. But unfortunately, Sonic isn't Mario, so it's not Betty's and cream until the game releases, because there's always a need to be skeptical of Sonic games. What exactly happened? Sonic Superstars was given the Midas touch of crap, because the developers are none other than Arzest. Arzest is essentially the modern day equivalent of LJN, nowhere near as bad, but they are well known to put out games that are consistently mediocre to just plain bad, with a romp of delightful masterpieces like Yoshi's New Island and Balan Wonderworld. Forget Bandai Namco, forget Monolith Soft, forget Headcanon, because Arzest, they know what they're doing. The fact that Arzest was announced to be developing Sonic Superstars was instantly a surrender for me. Maybe it could end up being decent, but I doubt it would end up amazing. But after the game launched, there was that sense of curiosity after hearing such mixed opinions on the game. It is by very definition a polarizing game, and it's a perfect candidate for Trash or Treasure. So I waited for Black Friday, got the game for $35, and was very intrigued to see where Sonic Superstars went wrong. And after playing it, I'm honestly shocked, and not in the ways you'd expect. This is a journey that can't start alone, because joining me today is also a Sonic fan, a way bigger Sonic fan than I am. That way we'll be looking at Sonic Superstars at so many different angles, it'll be like a Genesis special stage. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the SpongeBob-loving, King of Swifties himself, RidersDX.
Hey beautiful humans, I'm RidersDX and I want to give a big thanks to Meech for having me on here, but I really don't know what he's talking about. But I am super excited to give my rundown on the Blue Hedgehog's latest outing today. I do consider myself to be a doctorate of Sonic the Hedgehog studies, so I am well qualified.
Well then, now it's time to answer the question, is Sonic Superstars as bad as everyone makes it out to be, or is it actually a hidden gem? Or should I say, a hidden Chaos Emerald? You see, Sonic Superstars showcases the plan of the greatest scientist of all time, Dr. Eggman. Eggman created some of the greatest inventions, made some of the most advanced robots, but every time he made something, he realized other scientists had beat him to it. Eggman was depressed, until he realized that if he couldn't be the first to invent robots, he could be the first to make love to all the fat robots that inhabited the island. Wait a minute, oops, that's Sonic fanfic. But despite how insane that story would be, it's at least concise and clear to follow, because the actual story is incredibly sloppy, and you can barely follow it. In Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the story involves Eggman going after Sonic and Tails, but he convinces Knuckles that they're bad guys, and you get to see the cutscenes between zones unfold. And in Sonic Mania, Sonic and friends stop Dr. Eggman and his cronies from harnessing the energy of the Phantom Ruby. These stories are simple, and they're great for the kinds of games they are, but in Sonic Superstars, it's hard to even understand what the hell is going on. All I can gather is that Dr. Eggman teams up with Fang, who hasn't appeared in a 2D Sonic game since Sonic Triple Trouble. There's also a new character, Trip, who's also teamed up with Eggman and Fang. It's clear they're causing trouble, but there's no clear narrative to follow. The good news is that there are some excellently animated cutscenes, but considering how sloppy the story itself is, you're essentially just watching pretty animations, and that's about it. The story in a 2D Sonic game isn't that important, and a bad one won't be a deal breaker, but it's really weird how something that should have been at least easy to follow is just so sloppy. But as with any 2D Sonic game, the gameplay is going to be the most important factor. At face value, Sonic Superstars is what you'd expect from a 2D Sonic game. There are 4 playable characters, each with their own abilities. Sonic is the fastest and can drop dash, Tails can fly, Knuckles can glide and climb walls, and Amy can double jump and use her hammer attack. If you played Sonic 3 and Knuckles or Sonic Mania, you'll know exactly what to expect. Personally, I always go for Sonic or Knuckles. Whichever character you choose mainly comes down to a matter of preference, and none are overpowered either, incentivizing using all of them. The control itself is also what you'd expect. You run at the speed of light and jump. 2D Sonic games have some of the most simple controls where it's just movement with the D-pad or analog stick, and jumping with the buttons. But one aspect that's often talked about are the physics feeling off, along the lines of the characters feeling too heavy. Honestly, this might be an unpopular opinion, though definitely not my last, but the physics felt great. They're very similar to Sonic Mania, and even after going back to Mania, I hardly noticed much of a difference. With a game like Sonic the Hedgehog 4, the different physics are immediately apparent, but in Superstars, everything controls and feels great. That's one aspect of Sonic Superstars I had no issue with. The controls are rock solid, and the physics are great. So far, things look pretty good outside the sloppy story, but the mechanics and level design will be the ultimate test. Sonic Superstars introduces a new concept. By getting a Chaos Emerald, you also unlock a new power-up to use. Things such as cloning Sonic to attack enemies with multiple Sonics, gaining a fiery jump boost, and being able to find hidden objects. It's actually a great idea, and I did find some of the power-ups to be quite useful, but the execution is a bit cumbersome. You have to use the R button to select between them. It would have been nice to map some of them to the face buttons, but you have to cycle and select through all of them to use them. They last for a limited time, and regain energy once you reach a checkpoint. Cycling through them might not seem like a major issue, but it can slow down the pace of the game. I primarily use them only in instances where I either had to, or greatly would benefit by using them, but oftentimes, I would just play levels without them. Speaking of levels, the level design itself is also quite a huge talking point when it comes to Sonic Superstars. Many have stated Sonic Superstars has poor level design. That's a far cry from Sonic Mania, or even the Sonic Advance and Rush games, and in a platformer, bad level design can ruin an entire game. Sonic Superstars has 11 zones in total. Most of them consist of 2 acts per zone, but every third zone, it's one longer than average act rather than 2 acts. I don't understand why they went for that structure. These 1-act zones often just feel like a longer than average act, essentially just seemingly to be here so RZS could save some of the development time and use the remaining time to chug some blueberry wine. This is especially disappointing with Cyberstation. It's one of the most unique and interesting zones, but it only lasts for one level. Having one-act zones is odd, and definitely wasn't quality over quantity, but there are still 8 standard zones, so let's see how they hold up. The first 2 zones, being Bridge Island and especially Speed Jungle, are great. They give you an excellent sense of speed, which is exactly what separates Sonic from other platformers, but these zones are where Superstars peaks, and the remaining zones range from just good to sometimes bad. When the level design is good, it's nothing remarkable, and Mania did it better, but when it's bad, it's not that bad. I'm not a fan of underwater Sonic levels, and I'm not a fan of Sonic levels that have Sonic bouncing around like a pinball, to be honest. But the best way to summarize the level design, and the core of why it isn't great, is because it feels very Sonic 1 in terms of level design. The reason? It's because Naoto Oshima returned to make levels. He made levels for Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and CD, and his philosophy is radically different compared to what most expect from Sonic. His levels tend to be more exploration focused rather than speed and momentum focused. Now in Sonic CD, you also had the time travel mechanic, which made these kinds of levels way more interesting and fun to play. And if Superstars brought back time travel, I would be singing a different tune. But oftentimes, these zones suffer from Marble Zone syndrome. Decent level design on their own, but not fitting for a Sonic game. Oftentimes, I feel the pacing is too slow, and that's the last thing you'd want in a Sonic game. But outside of a select few acts, I found the overall levels to be fun enough, just not as fast paced as I would have liked. We have some interesting ideas in Sonic Superstars, but often subpar execution, and the overall level design, while not bad, doesn't suit Sonic well. Sonic Superstars so far has been the very definition of just okay, and I'm eagerly awaiting the bad. So perhaps it's bosses? The bosses of Sonic Superstars are easily the most hated aspect of the game. They're known to be tedious and not well designed, but with my experience, take a wild guess how the bosses turned out. Not great, but most weren't horrible. That is, except for the final bosses, which have an insane difficulty spike and can last well over 10 minutes. Even the first of the final bosses was absolutely infuriating. I'm all for a challenge, but these bosses were way more annoying than they were fun. I don't include spoilers in retrospectives, so I'm only talking about the final bosses in general without describing how the fights play out. But be warned, they are brutal and not in a good way. But overall, I didn't have strong feelings about the boss fights out of the final ones. Wouldn't you know it? They're just okay. So far, Sonic Superstars has proven to be incredibly mediocre, but that's just based on my experience. RidersDX, how do you feel about Sonic Superstars?
Well, before I basically jump into a fire, I'ma just say that 2D games are not really my cup of tea. As a longtime Sonic fan, I've always been a big advocate for the adventure games, the boost games, you know, anything that involves Sonic moving in a 3D space. But when it comes to the 2D planes, I like the games, but I've never been obsessed or in love with them. And that's just a taste thing. So with that being said, I went into Superstars with pretty moderate expectations, and I will say that I found the gameplay to be pretty solid. As you said before, the physics are really solid. They feel very similar to how Sonic and Co felt in Mania in the classic games, so I think from that standpoint they were very successful in emulating a classic Sonic experience. All the characters control really well as well. Sonic feels great, Tails has a very well balanced flight ability, Knuckles is the king, so he's always fantastic. And I will say, I actually enjoyed playing as Amy as well. She's sort of like an easy mode in this game. Having that double jump is really useful, and as someone who's played many games with Amy in them, I'm so glad that Amy doesn't control like trash anymore. She's become a very fun character to play in recent Sonic games. I also just want to shout the special stages. Now, special stages are very hit or miss for me when it comes to 2D Sonic games, but I felt like the special stages in Superstars were actually a lot of fun. First of all, it was in a 3D plane, so you all know I love a 3D plane. But second of all, I had a fun time like floating through these areas and trying to get to the Chaos Emeralds and collecting all these items along the way. It was a very solid special stage, and I don't really have any complaints when it comes to it. There's also another special stage that you don't get the Chaos Emerald in, but you do get like these coins to unlock stuff, and it's basically a spiritual successor to the special stages in Sonic 1. Now, I hated these special stages in Sonic 1, but in this game they control far better and they're way more fun, so I was very appreciative of them here. In terms of level design, so this is where we're gonna differ a little bit, because I do agree that there actually does seem to be a higher focus on more exploration compared to other Sonic games, but I actually really enjoyed this change. I think I like the level design in this game better than Mania, if I'm being totally honest. And the reason for that is because with Sonic games, it's a very slippery slope in terms of how much speed you put into the levels, because if you put too much speed, it can get to the point where the game feels almost automated at that point. And I don't like that in Sonic games. We've had so many boost games in particular where Sonic was pretty much on an automated path for like half of the levels, and I just don't think that's fun. That's very boring and just not exciting. I personally think that the level design in this game is a far cry from Marble Garden Zone. I mean, sure, there's definitely places where you slow down, but if you're still playing through the game and you're skilled enough at it, then you actually can get through these levels pretty quickly. Now, I will say that does take time, and I'm a Sonic fan, so I've been playing these games forever, so I sort of just am able to get a quicker grasp on the levels more than most people can. But I felt like the level design was pretty fun, and you know, just another solid addition to the classic Sonic game library. I will echo your thoughts on the bosses though. So I didn't hate the bosses, but a lot of times it did feel very cheap. But honestly, the thing that I really disliked the most about the bosses is the fact that they were stacked on the end of every single act. Why can't we have a separate act for these really big bosses that are really challenging? I don't want to go through like a 10-minute level only to spend 10 more minutes on a boss because I'm trying to figure out what to do with the boss. Why is this a thing still? Give the boss a separate act, especially if you're going to make it so challenging. Otherwise, I thought the gameplay was pretty solid.
Very well said. Perhaps the presentation will give it an edge. I loved how the game looked when it was revealed, and Sonic games are known to have some stellar music, so let's see how the presentation fares. Remember how I said the physics feeling great was an unpopular opinion? Well, get ready for perhaps my most unpopular opinion of all time. I vastly prefer how Sonic Superstars looks over Mania. While I can appreciate what Sonic Mania went for, and I'll even admit it looks great, I didn't want another Sonic game in the pixel style. The pixel art style was cool for Shovel Knight and Sonic Mania, but it's been so overused, and it's so overdone. It's lost all meaning, and I'm just so sick of nostalgia pandering. I think it's cool to have pixel elements, but not having the entire art style be pixelated. Sonic Superstars goes for a 2.5D art style, very similar to the 2D levels of Sonic Generations, and it looks great. Everything has a good attention to detail, and the environments are colorful and vivid. I'm playing it on the Xbox Series X, so it won't look as good on the Switch, but from what I've seen, it still looks good on the Switch. The zones themselves also look great. The first zone is yet again similar to Green Hill, but it has a beach theme, and there's even a sunset which looks gorgeous. The standout zones are Speed Jungle, Snow Base, Sand Sanctuary, Cyber Station, and the final zone. The other zones look quite nice as well, but those ones stood out a bit more. I also love the character design. It goes for the classic Sonic look, and honestly, I prefer the classic look for the characters, though I also do like the modern designs. But for a 2D game, it's cool they went for the classic designs. The performance of the game is also great. Everything runs at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second, which is necessary for a Sonic game. And it's even at 60 frames per second on the Nintendo Switch. Graphically, Sonic Superstars excels more than any other aspect, but if there's one critique, it's with the theming. One of the most wanted additions to a new 2D Sonic game after Sonic Mania were new zones, because Mania had some incredible new zones, such as Studiopolis and Press Garden, and I wanted to see a whole game with new zones, but although the zones are technically new, they all feel very similar to previous zones. It kind of feels like New Super Mario Bros. U, where their environments were technically different, but retained the same core themes. Speed Jungle is cool, but reminds me a bit too much of Angel Island, and Press Factory is Press Garden, but without the Japanese flair or garden aspect, just the industrial aspect. Kind of fitting considering how this game has turned out. Sonic Superstars is a very pretty game to look at, but it's not innovating in terms of zone themes. Music, on the other hand, oh boy. Most have said it's a mixed bag, but honestly, if it's a mixed bag, then it's the most uneven mixed bag I've ever seen. Only a few tracks are great, but the rest are underwhelming. It's very similar to Sonic 4 where it goes for a Sega Genesis style, but in a game like this, it feels cheap, and it doesn't sound good. It almost sounds like royalty-free music. When am I gonna start hearing Carefree in this game? What's insane to me is that even the worst Sonic games, like Sonic R and Sonic 06, still manage to have banger soundtracks. But guess what? It's yet again, and you're not gonna believe this, just okay. It doesn't sound awful, but it doesn't sound anywhere close to good, and with the sound design, a lot of sound effects are reused from Mania, consistently reminding you of a better game. But what did you think of the presentation, RidersDX?
So I am also quite tired of nostalgia pandering in media, so I greatly appreciated Superstars for trying to be something brand new, because while I thought Mania was a very solid game, the fact that over half of its levels are previously used levels was something I was never a fan of. Like, why do we need 2 more levels in Green Hill Zone? That's the most overused and overdone level in Sonic games. So I liked how Superstars not only went with a 2.5D style, which looks great, like honestly the game looks gorgeous, and still maintains that classic pandering that the people that want this game are going to love, but also I think the levels ideas are actually pretty original overall. I don't necessarily agree that these locations aren't innovative enough. To me, there isn't a single level theme that blends too closely to that of a previous level. I mean, there's definitely some overlap, but it's also a natural result of being a 30-year-old franchise. Like, it's going to be harder and harder to come up with completely original locations, and I think that while a lot of these locations are previous level themes that were used in previous games, I think they all have a bunch of little twists and differences that make them their own things. Like Cyberstation in particular is a real highlight. There are some Sonic games that try to do a similar theme, but I really liked how they did it here, especially seeing the characters demolecularize into these different like forms of themselves. It looks really cool. I also really liked Golden Capital in particular. It's a nice spin on the typical casino trope in Sonic games, especially 2D classic Sonic games. It's a bit more of like a Greek/Rome town. I don't know how to describe it, but I really dug it here. As for the music, I can't remember a single track in this game, and this is actually kind of heartbreaking coming from a Sonic fan, because if there's one thing I can always count on when it comes to Sonic games, it's the music. The music usually always slaps, but I don't know, this time nothing was really that memorable to me, and I didn't care for it. I don't really have anything else to say because there's really nothing else to say when it comes to the music. I don't know, I appreciate how they tried to stick very closely to the Genesis theme of it all, but I almost felt like they stuck a little too close to it because it doesn't sound that different from previous 2D Sonic games. And so I think it just needed its own identity, which it doesn't really have here.
Whoa, you were way harsher about the music than I expected. And to be fair, some of the tracks are memorable. I remembered one of the songs. It was the first act of the final zone. From a visual standpoint, Sonic Superstars is great, but from a music standpoint, it's well below average. Mix the two together, and you get once again, mediocrity. In terms of content, Sonic Superstars has 11 zones and 26 levels in total, each lasting around 5 to 7 minutes. I was able to beat the game within just a few days, though I wasn't playing it consistently. If you're going to 100% it, there's a bit more to do. Without getting into spoilers, there's an additional campaign unlocked once you beat the game, and you need to get all the Chaos Emeralds. You're looking at best around 20 hours. The thing is, Sonic games are known for their replayability. Usually, I'll play through Sonic games multiple times, but the game itself is about the length, if not shorter than Sonic Mania. It's definitely shorter than Mania in one regard. I actually wanted to keep replaying Mania, and I still go back to it even to this day, but Sonic Superstars, one playthrough was enough. The level design is mediocre, the new ideas are mediocre, and it's an experience I'm glad I had, but I can't see myself going back to it all that much. One new aspect that was heavily promoted was co-op multiplayer. It seemed like a cool idea, but I had my doubts about it. Considering Sonic is all about going as fast as possible, I was concerned that multiplayer would be a constant game of catch-up. And unfortunately, my concerns were a reality. The multiplayer in Sonic Superstars is not just okay, it is bad, and not at all fun to play. My friend Riley and I tried playing it, and we couldn't keep up with each other. Just because most 2D platformers nowadays have single-screen co-op, that doesn't mean Sonic should do it too. Because it just doesn't work. Just like a Twitch moderator. An option for split screen would have been ideal, but overall, the multiplayer, don't even bother with it. Riley and I played it, and we quickly stopped playing and played Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe and Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and we had a much better time with those games. So then we get into the elephant in the room. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is better in every way. No, the real elephant is that Sonic Superstars is $60. It often goes on sale. I got my copy for $35, and at that price, I think it might be worth getting. Definitely more of a $20 game though. And if there's one thing I can say with uttermost confidence, it is not worth $60. There are a few other additional modes. There's a battle mode where players can compete for the most amount of stars, where you can use your metallic robots that you can make with the medals you collect. But the thing is, you can only use the robotic characters in the battle mode and the time attack. And it's a shame too, considering that you can make Metal Sonic and even Metal Knuckles from Sonic R. It's a real disappointment you can't use them in the main story mode, but even with these additional modes, there's still not enough content to justify the $60 price tag. RidersDX, did you feel Mr. Krabs duped you with Sonic Superstars as well?
Listen. Mr. Krabs would never dupe me because I'm smarter than everyone in the room. But in all seriousness, this game is definitely not worth 60 bucks. It's technically the same retail price as Frontiers, and we don't even need to go into why that game is so much bigger and so much more worthwhile than this game is. But the fact that you can just look at a game that came out last year within the same franchise to explain why this game is hugely overpriced is not a light statement. Now, as a 2D Sonic game, it is very typical in terms of length and content, so I had pretty well managed expectations going into this game, and I was not surprised by the amount of content that was in this game at all. I was just expecting a solid like 11 or 12 zones that would equate to a game that overall lasted maybe a few hours to a couple days. You know, that's all I really was expecting, and that's exactly what I got. And so I'm not surprised by the severe lack of content, as some people might put it, but honestly, the game really should not be priced at 60 bucks. And so if it was priced more appropriately, then I don't think this would be such a big discussion.
It's games like Sonic Superstars that give 2D platformers a bad rep. Many think none are worth $60 because of games like this. A game like Super Mario Bros. Wonder that is built with so much love, charm, and care, that introduced so many new ideas despite being 2D, absolutely worth it. But Sonic Superstars, it feels like a budget game. It's clear it was developed on a budget, and if that's the case, don't charge $60 for it. If you're gonna treat Sonic Superstars like a AAA game, it better be one. As a game itself, it's not horrible, but unlike most gaming journalists, I factor price in considering it's very important. If this was $30, I might be more lenient, but even so, guess what game was $20 at launch and was better in nearly every way? Sonic Mania. It's proof that oftentimes, games priced at a fraction of the cost can be a million times more fun. I can say with uttermost certainty, Sonic Superstars is grossly overpriced at $60, but as a game itself, is it as bad as everyone claimed it was? So far we've established Sonic Superstars is the perfect blend of good and bad. The ideas are cool, but execution is subpar. The level design is just okay. The story is sloppy. The game visually looks great, but has underwhelming music, and the amount of content does not justify its $60 price tag. But fun still can be had. So what's the verdict? Sonic Superstars is the very definition a peak mediocrity. It is the most okay game I've ever played. I've seen Nintendo fanboys claim a game like Mario Strikers Battle League is just mediocre, but I consider that game flat out bad because there's absolutely nothing to do and it has no content. It doesn't matter if fun can be had with it when it's about as deep as a puddle, but Sonic Superstars is competent enough. It's a full game even if it's overpriced, and I did have fun with it, although I didn't find it to be anything spectacular. But how did you feel, RidersDX?
As a geriatric Sonic fan, I've been around the block long enough to know what to expect. A 2D Sonic game is never going to be that Sonic game for me. I grew up falling in love with games like Sonic Adventure 2 and Sonic Heroes. I fell in love with 3D gameplay. And so, because I went to 2D gameplay after 3D gameplay, 2D gameplay was just never going to be something that was hugely interesting to me afterwards. No matter what game it is, no matter what circumstance it is, it just isn't there for me. So I knew going to this game I wasn't going to love it, and it wasn't going to be a game I would constantly go back to. I don't even go back to Sonic Mania or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which are some of the best 2D Sonic games to ever come out. But with that being said, considering my preconceived mindset going into a game like this, I think Superstars is a more than competent 2D title that should tickle the taste buds of the classic fans. It's solidly built, I think the level design is pretty good personally, and I think the game looks great, and I think it's a nice, $30 to $40 game, honestly. Definitely not 60 bucks. It's not broken, it's not a terrible game. I would stay away from the multiplayer because that's definitely going to change your opinion if you try to engage with that. But other than that, it's a solid game. And I think if you are a fan of 2D Sonic games, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't go pick this up. It's not a Sonic 4 situation, so you're safe. I enjoyed my time in the game, but I'm gonna just go back to Adventure 2 now because that's just who I am.
Very well said. I'm definitely more of a casual Sonic fan, so it didn't disappoint me as much as it did for others, but I realized something. Sonic is one of the most iconic game franchises, and just okay should not be the standard. Going from the greatness of Sonic Mania to mediocrity with Sonic Superstars is not a good thing. It honestly feels like the new Super Mario Bros. U of the Sonic series. Some claim that would be Sonic the Hedgehog 4, but that game is legitimately bad. I'd say it's more on par with Super Mario Bros. Special, using an iconic name while delivering a crappy game. I completely understand the disappointment, but from my experience, it was just such a nothing burger of a game. Sonic Superstars is mediocre. It's meh. And it's getting the ranking of tarnished bronze, and that's what I call a certified RZest production. Big thanks to RidersDX for being part of this episode of Trash or Treasure. If you love Nintendo, Sonic, and SpongeBob, RidersDX makes incredible videos about them. My favorites being the ones covering SpongeBob games like Battle for Bikini Bottom and Cosmic Shake. Make sure to subscribe to him if you haven't already. So what do you guys think about Sonic Superstars? Let me know in the comments, and as always, keep calm and da-da on. And I'll be seeing you next time in 2024. Here's to a wonderful New Year.